Okay, well, tonight I'll have a little bit of introduction, but if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to the first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes. Of course, I had it marked in mine so I could find it a lot quicker. But you'll have a little bit of time. So as I was studying today, I was kind of shocked. I do a lot of my study on my iPad, and sometimes it's kind of annoying, but you get little pop-up messages of what the news is that's going on for the day. And this news would not have impacted me quite as much as if I did not have 3 kids that were sports nuts. And one of the things that I've learned is about, I wouldn't say all of the basketball players' names, but I've learned a whole bunch about basketball and basketball players' names. But the headline that came across this afternoon as I was studying, it said, Kobe Bryant killed in a helicopter crash, ran into a hillside in California. Him and also his 13-year-old daughter this morning. So obviously that's pretty shocking. This is a name that I've heard in my house for years. My kids have had shoes made by this, well, not made by him probably, but with his name on them. And you know, we've followed what was probably the end of his career, because I think he's since retired. But what a tragedy that is. And it just goes to show us, and it's another reminder for all of us, that life on this earth is short, and it frequently ends much sooner than we can expect. You know, thinking of this man, he was actually probably only 2 years older than me, and his child was my kid's age. So kind of brings that message home to us. So while human beings, you know, we often make a lot of bad choices in our lives, but few of us are truly, and don't laugh at this, but few are truly stupid. You know, men, women, and children with half a brain can tell you that death is a part of life on this earth, and that there will not be one that escapes it. In fact, one of my favorite street preachers, Ray Comfort, he wrote a book. I haven't read it yet, but I can imagine what it's about. He said, all my friends are dying. Of course, he's saying that no matter who you are on this earth, no matter what type of health care you have, an HMO or none at all, you know, all of us will face death one of these days. So it is that thought, though, that often leads individuals to ask the question, then, if death is at the end of this life, then what is the purpose of this life? You know, I believe we see a lot of consternation going on in our land today, and young people and old people alike. You know, there's a suicide epidemic out there. And in many respects, you know, when you talk to people today, they feel that despite all that's going on, that they have no purpose in life, and that it would be better that life were ended than they continue to live life as it is. You know, if you were to go out on the streets and you were to ask people, what is the purpose of life? You would probably get as many different answers as the people that you talk to. You know, some may tell you that the purpose of life is to just do the things that make you feel good and what you want to do and enjoy life. Probably many people would say that. Some may say that it's to work hard and to accomplish much. You know, around graduation time, I'm sure Brother and Sister Gayhart, they probably listened to a lot of graduation speeches about how the class of such and such should go out there and change the world. But some others, they may tell you that it's a chance to be an advocate and to right the wrongs that they see in society today. That's probably a very common view today, that maybe is the purpose of life. But fortunately for us, there's a whole book of the Bible that's actually dedicated, believe it or not, to this topic. And that is the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, I'm not going to have time to preach through the whole book tonight. I'm thinking about maybe making it a regular thing. Just depends on how tonight goes and if the Lord leads me that way or not. But tonight I would like to begin an introduction into the book of Ecclesiastes. It's always been one of those books that, as I myself, studied it or have read it, I kind of read bits and pieces here, and I thought, man, this is a depressing book. And then you flip back to Proverbs, or you go to Psalms, or somewhere else, and don't spend too much time on the book of Ecclesiastes. But it is in there with the book of Psalms, Proverbs, and Job, and the Song of Solomon. It's one of the books considered the book of wisdom. So each of these books of wisdom does have a purpose, and it has knowledge which it wishes to impart to mankind on their responsibility and their relationship to their fellow man, and especially to God. And so Ecclesiastes is just like that. But a lot of these books, like Psalms and Proverbs especially, you'll notice that they generally have a bright or a neutral tone to them. But, like I said, I've always seen Ecclesiastes as a little bit dark and depressing. One of the channels I like to watch on YouTube, they look at different books in the Bible, and they call the writer of Ecclesiastes the skeptic on life. He's questioning really what this life is about. And of course they show him he's smoking a pipe and he's questioning life. And that's really how this book, most of it, goes through, kind of like that skeptic questioning life and what its purpose is. But if you're not careful, if you read just parts of it, you may come away, though, with some bad theology if you just cherry pick a verse here and there. It's not like some of the Gospels and some of the other books where you can take a verse out like John 3:16 and you can preach a whole message on John 3:16. But you have to be very careful with Ecclesiastes. For example, in Ecclesiastes, the 7th chapter and 16th verse, it reads, "Be not righteous over much." Other versions say, don't be too righteous. Neither make yourself overly wise, or be too wise. Why should thou destroy thyself? So you could come away saying that the Bible is saying that righteousness is not good and that wisdom is a foolish pursuit. But you would be wrong. You've only read one verse. You've taken it out of context. Or kids, hear this one. In Ecclesiastes 12:12, it says, "Of making much books there is no end, and much study is weariness of the flesh." But wait, before you use that as an excuse not to do your homework tonight and take that to your teacher, the Bible told me not to do it. Too much studying is going to ruin my brain. Hear me out. The book of Ecclesiastes, though, it becomes much clearer when you do what I did. Started at the beginning, sat down in one sitting and read it all the way through. If you read it through in one sitting, you'll notice that it's a type of book that you can't just take bits and pieces of. The writer is developing a thought from the beginning to the end. So it's you can't be like, I was thinking, you can't be like people that sit in the back of your car and they're playing on their cell phones and stuff, and you're having a conversation, and then all of a sudden they butt in and they have no clue what's going on in the conversation. If you try to butt in the middle of Ecclesiastes, that's kind of what your experience will be. You'll be clueless and you won't understand it. But when you do read it from beginning to end, you can see then that the author has an intent and a pattern to his writing. The intent of the author is to flesh out a man's thoughts and experiences in life to see if he can determine the purpose of life and the best time in which to spend, or the best way in which to spend the limited amount of time that we have on this earth. And I say this author because many believe it's Solomon that's writing it. I believe it's Solomon that's writing it, but some have proposed that there could potentially be another author of the book of Ecclesiastes. But I believe, he describes himself as king in Jerusalem, as a son of David. He shows great wisdom. He talks about having great wisdom. To me, it's kind of like it looks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it sounds like Solomon to me. But others will tell you, perhaps not. But the author here, he's writing his thoughts. So while the book was inspired to be put into the Bible and preserved for the record and put into the canon of Scripture, it's always been a part of Jewish Scripture, you have to remember that much of it is a man thinking through what the purpose of life is, and then he's going to come to a conclusion at the end. The writer's pattern here is somewhat like that argumentative essay that some of you may have remembered having to write in school. I remember helping one of my sons write one of these, and I was refreshed on how to write an argumentative essay. And they said the first thing you've got to have is a hook. You've got to have something in there to grab the reader's attention. And you'll see when we read the first chapter here, there's a hook in there, something to grab the reader's attention. And then you have to make a thesis statement. You have to tell them what it is that you believe and what you're going to defend and the question that you are going to answer. And then there's a body to that essay that will have the text and the explanation where you're going to argue your point. And then hopefully, if you want an A on your paper, you're going to put a conclusion at the end of that. What did you find out after you concluded that? In fact, talking about basketball players, I think it was Austin's essay, and I think we were writing something about why basketball players should make a lot of money or not. So I think we were arguing that their pay was okay. We weren't going to change it. But anyways, the writer here, he's doing exactly this, and in the body of his text, he's describing the results of his experiments and his observations of earth and society. And then in chapter 12, he comes with the famous concluding statement that you'll hear most messages actually preached on: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. But yet there is a journey here in Ecclesiastes, this journey of discovery to get us to that conclusion. And it's very pertinent, I feel, to those who are living in today's modern society. You'll find out that King Solomon, he was very wealthy. He had all the goods that this earth could afford him, and he could make a pretty good go at it if he wanted to party and he wanted to see what even foolishness would bring, if that would bring him the pleasure and if that would bring him the meaning of life. And I think, even in today's American society, this book really could speak volumes to us, because we live in a society with, I was thinking of some of the words that we use, like disposable income. Where else in the world does anybody have disposable income? People take a staycation. They're just going to take days off and just stay at home and do nothing. And just for Brother Tony and Sister Donna, doggy bags. In some parts of the world, they eat their doggies. But here we have enough food that we will put it in a bag and we'll take it home for our doggie. But, much of this, for much of this time, though, nothing, or much of the world, like I said, nothing is disposable, especially money. And the only vacation many people get, and even in the past here in America, was when they're sick and unable to work. But in many respects, we live the life of kings, and should we not therefore learn how to live it well before we rush out and we waste it on foolishness, sensuality, and greedy pursuit of career and money or some other personal ambition that wouldn't be worth it. So we'll start off our study tonight with just a brief look here of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And I'll go ahead and read it if you'll just read along with me here. It says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of his labor, which he taketh under the sun?" So right there, if you missed it, verse 2, I'd call that the hook. He's getting you into what he's getting ready to talk about. And part of his thesis statement here too, he's asking that question, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? So everything that you do, what's the purpose of life, he's asking. And then he starts talking here about the generations and about the earth. He says, "One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. But the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteneth to its place where he arose. The wind goeth towards the south, and it turneth around unto the north. It whirleth around continually. And the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not yet full. Unto the place from whence the rivers came, thither they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing." We'll just stop there for just a couple minutes here. But he's just making general observations of the earth and life itself. We see that generations of men, they come and they go with little impact on this earth. And I got to thinking about how true that is. You know, many of us have driven by graveyards and perhaps even stopped to walk through them, and you see the names on those tombstones, and you maybe even see names that match your own last name, and you kind of wonder, you know, who were those people? Does anybody remember them today? And the truth is, in 100 years, nobody's going to probably remember any of us. You know, they won't remember us. They won't remember that we were in this service tonight. But that's the truth. That's the fact of life. So if you look at that and you decide that you're going to build a pursuit of life where you will be greatly remembered, you have to remember even now poor George Washington's almost a footnote in our kids' textbooks. I'd say he did a whole lot for our nation. He, maybe not even trying to do so, built a pretty good name for himself. But yet he's even falling victim to the march of history. You know, so people that are living to make a great impact on the world, you know, that's not always, we make a big impact for sure. You know, if you think of the generations that ended slavery in the U.S., you know, what was called the greatest generation, the World War II veterans that brought freedom to a terrorized Europe in the 1940s, but yet in time, even they will be forgotten. You know, as I was studying at it, just brought up a really interesting point, something maybe that I or you have never thought of before. And that's if this is the norm, that events so easily get buried in history, how significant must that event have been that happened on Golgotha's hill there 2,000 years ago? It must have been incredibly significant, right? You know, it shows that Christ is for all generations, from beginning to end, as he has never been lost to history. I remember a story, I believe And all of a sudden, the man's name's skipping. Voltaire, that's it. A famous French atheist of, I believe, the 1700s. He said that he was going to, in his lifetime, he was going to bury the work single-handedly that it took 12 men and an entire church, 1,000 or so years to establish. And the funny thing is, probably most of you, when I said Voltaire, didn't even know who I was talking about. The other funny thing is that his house was later turned into a printing press for Bibles. So who got buried by history? It certainly was not the Word of God, and it certainly was not Jesus Christ. But truly, history buries things, but it does not bury Christ. And he said that work was finished on the cross. It never buried his work on the cross. So if there's someone out there that still needs to be saved, the work and the blood is still in effect. It has not been buried by history. So it's the one thing I'd have to say that defies what Solomon observes here. He also notes that this earth, it's full of endless and wearying cycles. The sun, it goes up and down, the streams, they go to and forth, the wind is moving and coming back to where it came before. Everything, he says, is just weariness. He says even in man's life, he says there's weariness. There's things that just cannot be satisfied. He said your eyes will never be satisfied with seeing. Your ears will never be satisfied with hearing. There's probably several people here who, even though your ears don't hear as good as they used to, get a hearing aid. Back in the day, they used to have that little horn thing that they'd stick in their ear because they still wanted to be able to hear. Yeah, what'd you say, sonny? You see the movies. The ear, it's never filled with hearing, he says. It's full of weariness. Yet he observes that for the most part, most of man's, I haven't got there yet, but these cycles of weariness are there. And that there's many things, even we would not want to be deprived of. And then going on here, let's see here, let's start at verse 9. It says, the thing that has been done, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath already been of old time which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those things that shall come after. So I'm going to stop there for just a minute. He observes here that for the most part, most of man's ideas, they've already been done. Now, you're going to tell me, well, Brother Romine, there weren't airplanes and computers and light bulbs in Solomon's time. That's all new. But yet, he's speaking of the desire of man's heart. He's speaking of man. There was always that desire of human inventiveness. It's always been there, and it still will be there, even in the future. I was worried one time. I got to thinking, I was like, man, if I get to heaven, all the work will be done, and I just don't know. Is it going to be an interesting place? I really like creativeness, and I like seeing new things build and new things coming out. And I just imagine that I would love to live in my great-grandparents' time sometimes, because I'd like to, see history progress from the horse and buggy to the cars that we have today, and to see them to go from just little airplanes that could barely get off the ground to going to the moon. How amazing that would be. And I'm amazed at creativity, and I love creativity. I'm trying to renovate an old house. You have to be creative sometimes, if you've ever done that before. Trying to fix all the things that are now all crooked and just don't fit like they should. But I got to thinking, God is the master of creation. He is the greatest of all creators. Creativity is an attribute of God. There will be no shortage of creativity in God's heaven. It's one of His attributes. So anybody that, in our church service in Marysville one time, pastor said when he was young, he just thought, well, heaven's just going to be one big church service. He's like, I don't know if that would be interesting or not. But he said he started as an adult reading through Revelation, and he said, and you can see it reading through Revelation, just the incredible amount of activity that's going on. There's incredible work that's being done. There's rejoicing that's being done. It's just an amazing place. I haven't been there yet, but when you read Revelations chapter, and you get to the end of Revelations, you're just like John. Even so, Lord, come. We're ready to see it. But here, the desires of man, though, the things that make up man, are not new. They've been before and they will continue. And it's interesting, you can see even for man's sinful side, whether you go back 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 6,000 years, you realize that we're still pretty much the same type of beings. Still trying to see if we can become like God without having to walk with Him in the garden. And again, thinking to Jesus here, He breaks this cycle. We're stuck in this cycle of weariness that Solomon talks about here in the first chapter, a cycle of birth, sin, death. But it was only He that was born of a virgin. It was only He that did not sin. It was only He that died a death that He did not deserve. And it was only He, to this point, that God has resurrected and didn't die again. He went back up to heaven. Now, one of these days we'll all, if you're saved, get to experience that. But to this point, only He has broken this mold of weariness that Solomon talks about. So with this introduction done, Solomon, he begins to lay out his plan to find out what the purpose of life is. What will make his life, my life, your life meaningful? What is it that we must do to make the most of the little time in which we have? And we'll pick up here again in the 12th verse, and we'll finish this out. It says, I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. And I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. Actually, I want to stop there because I meant to mention this word vanity. It's very important in Ecclesiastes, and no study here is going to be complete without just a short mention of this word, vanity. In the Hebrew, it's the word, it's hevel. Everything is hevel, hevel, hevel. And there's three different meanings, essentially, which that can be translated. And if you read the NIV and some other versions, it'll translate it meaningless. It's just meaningless. But actually that word can mean much more than meaningless. The probably better translation of it is something that's fleeting. It's vapor-like. It's transitory in nature. And that's why they had in the video, they had the man smoking his pipe, because it's symbolic of a vapor, of a smoke. It looks like it's there, that it has substance, but if you were to reach out and try to grab it, it would just slip through your hands. So when Solomon is saying vanity here, that's what he's describing his work and life. It's like that. It can also mean that futile and meaningless, but more so when it's used in that term, or in those terms, it's talking about the fall of mankind and the entry of sin into the world. And then it can also, the third meaning, can be incomprehensible. It's a question that can't be answered. So those are the three meanings of vanity when it's used in the Scripture here. And actually, this word hevel, this word translated here vanity, it's used about 60 times in the Old Testament, and over 30 of them are right here in Ecclesiastes. So that's why I had to talk about it a little bit, because it's a very important word in Ecclesiastes. So he says here that I've seen all the works, verse 14, that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Doesn't this start to sound a little down? It will get better. But that which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they which have been before me in Jerusalem. That's why I would argue that this is probably written by Solomon right there. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this is also vexation of spirit. For in such wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Kind of some interesting words there. So anyway, Solomon here, he says that he's going to give his heart to this business of finding out the purpose and meaning of life. And in the Hebrew, it's indicating that he's not just giving his heart, but he's giving his all. He's giving everything he has. He's going to give his mind, his will, his emotions, his strength to this task. So if he had a lot of money, as we know, he was going to put that in there too. He had the ability, and we'll find out later, to buy slaves and to have concubines and to have all these things. He was going to do that too. You know, he even talks about consuming alcohol and foolishness, and he was going to do some of that too, although he said, in my right, I kept my mind, I kept my wisdom with me. So somebody that says that, you know, Solomon was drunk, there's probably an argument against that, because that's not what he said. But he's conducting an experiment, and he's observing not just himself, but others. So he's giving everything he has into this. And if you notice here, the task was not to be done just for pleasure. He was truly trying to approach this from an empirical and experimental perspective. He's hoping to bring to us some wisdom that will tell us more about the meaning of life. And he's going to look into many things that I mentioned early on that people say is the meaning of life: health, wealth, prosperity, gaining fame, fortunes, all those things. He's going to look into that and to see if it'll truly bring someone happiness. It's not going to be an easy proposition, though, because he says, you know, what is crooked cannot be made straight. And what is lacking, it just can't be counted. There's some things which he's going to look into which are going to be truly unanswerable questions. And it's oftentimes hard to get into men's minds. Even though Solomon may be good, he couldn't read men's minds. So Solomon's plan, it was not to just explore the wise things of life but also so he could say that that was the purpose of life, but he was also going to explore foolishness, he said. He said, maybe we're the ones being fooled. That's what the world will tell Christians today. You know, you're a bunch of fools because we are living it up. We're going out and partying every weekend. We're doing this, we're doing that. I've got 17 girlfriends, whatever. I'm living it up. You're a fool because you're going to spend your Wednesdays, you're going to spend your Sundays in church. You know, they feel sorry for us. So Solomon's going to see if they have a reason to feel sorry for us or not, or perhaps we have a reason to feel sorry for them. We'll have to find out. And interestingly, he notes that both, he said both were found to be trying to catch the wind. Neither of them gave him satisfaction, so he's given us a little hint here, or appeared to be the purpose of life. And I was thinking about that. How can too much wisdom be something that's not good? And then, I don't know, maybe if any of you probably have shopped for a car recently, or a computer, or a TV, or something, and you go online, or you go to the dealership to talk to them, and you try to get a lot of wisdom before you go, because you want to make a good choice. And I've done this before, especially online. You're looking for a TV, and now they've got, the 4K picture. Is that the good one, or is the, ULED the good one? Is the 1080 HD the good one? I don't know. They all look the same. You're trying to gain wisdom. I have no idea what those things even mean. So then I'll read the reviews on it. That'll help me, right? I start reading the reviews, and I'm gaining more wisdom. But one says this is good, and the other one says it's trash. And you just about drive yourself crazy. And by the time you buy something, you're not even happy with it. You're frustrated with it. You think you got cheated. So in some ways, maybe that's what Solomon is describing there, that sometimes wisdom in itself can't even bring happiness. Everything looks bad sometimes when you have too much wisdom. So we don't have to be confused, I think, what Solomon's saying. Many of us have had that experience to know what Solomon's talking about. So I was trying to think, how do we wrap up? How do we conclude this first chapter and conclude this message tonight? And what came to mind was really a great sense of gratitude to a God that invites human reason. God invited, and in fact, He made sure that His writings here in Ecclesiastes were preserved for us. A lot of atheists, a lot of people that are filled with man's wisdom, they'll tell you that that's all there is. You have to be mindless to submit your life to Jesus Christ. It's a mindless act. And I have to disagree with them. I remember I listened not too long ago to Martin Lloyd-Jones preach a message about, I believe it comes from somewhere in 1st or 2nd Peter, gird up the loins of your mind. Of course, now I can't listen to him as well because we were talking in Marysville, and one of the guys said he kind of sounds like that owl from what was that, Tootsie Pop commercial. He rolls his R's and stuff, but it was a great message. And he said, these atheists that say that you have to lose your mind to follow Jesus Christ, they're the same ones that if you don't lose your mind for their religion and their ideas, they'll be more than happy to beat it out of your skull. He said, here they are talking about Christians, having to lose their mind. But the Bible is saying, gird up the loins of your mind. Get wise. God invites us to get close to Him, to bring His Word in there, to read it, to study it, to pray over it. He invites us to bring our burdens to Him, to the cross, and lay them on Him. How am I going to lay them on Him if I don't take them to Him and I don't talk to Him? And that's why I think, too, when I look at the family and I look at how the family works, I've gotten 6 years now to see how the family works, and that's one of the reasons I think the Bible is so insistent on defending the family, on defending traditional marriage. It's representative of our relationship with God. I hope my kids and we don't always agree on things, but I think they know, as I knew with my father, that although we may not agree on things, I knew that he loved me, and I knew that whatever decision he was making was really going to be what was best for me. that I could come to my Father, and that's exactly how God the Father is. He's given us His Son, Jesus Christ, that we can boldly approach His throne. And here we have a man in Solomon that's pouring out his life, his heart. He's trying to find what the meaning of life is, and he wants to make sure that the meaning of life follows along with what God wants for his life. Is it anything else? He doesn't know. He's going to find out. And that's what the whole book of Ecclesiastes is going to study. I think of many men, and I'm sure there's lots of women too, but I could think of two men that were atheists and were very much against God, that they grew close to God, they studied, they interacted with God, and in such a way they became very strong Christians. One you'll know for sure, C.S. Lewis. If you've ever watched the Narnia series, if you haven't watched the movies, I've heard the books are great, I haven't read the books, but if you haven't watched the movies, highly recommend them. But C.S. Lewis was a man who had to be convinced, he had to reason through his relationship with God, just like Solomon is doing here. And another would be Lee Strobel. He would be one you'd look up on YouTube. Wrote The Case for Christ and many other Christian books, was an atheist lawyer, had many other issues. I believe he says in his testimony, I want to say that he had an alcohol problem and issues with his wife, that, he got saved and he walked out in the kitchen the one day and his child said, "What's happened? Something's changed." Everybody knew that something changed because he had gotten close to Jesus Christ. He had argued it out. In fact, he was the lawyer that was going to put Christ on trial, and when he did, he ended up his desk on the one side, The Case for Christ, that the name of his book, was piled. In fact, I think he had several piles. And the case against Christ only had 2 papers in it. So he said, if this is the evidence for Christ, I've been a fool for neglecting him. I've been a fool for rejecting him. And you know what? If Christ is real, he said, come into my heart, come into my life, change me. And he prayed that prayer, and he was changed like that. So there's many that God is inviting us to come to him. So if you are a skeptic that's listening tonight, you may think that there's a better way to live your life. And listen, God is not going to force you to do otherwise. I want to say that again. God will never, I remember this, another guy I like to watch, Mark Turek on YouTube, and a young man stood up in the audience and he said, my grandmother, didn't believe in Christ, and is she in hell today? And Mark Turek said, I can't tell you that, sir. But he said, all I can tell you is that God will not put a gun to anybody's head and force them into heaven. He will not force you if you do not want to go. But God, he's looking for those that truly love him and will put their faith in him as they would their own earthly father or their best friend. Maybe some people didn't know their father or didn't have a good father, but almost everybody's had a best friend. He wants you to treat him in that manner, to come to him like that. So before you choose to walk away from God, could I first convince you to question your motives to do so? Could I convince you to think about the meaning of life and where you will truly find happiness in the end of all these things? Will the way that you live now bring you joy in 10 years? Will it bring you peace in hard times? And where and when your name is in the obituary section, will you have peace then? I was thinking of Brother Justin's testimony this morning of Sister Vaughn. Just such a sweet lady, good Christian lady. and just the peace that she had at 101 years old, peace and rejoicing, ready to go home. She knew where she was going. She knew that she would soon see Christ. So is the way that you're living your life, is it going to end in that? Solomon had to work through this stuff. You know, Solomon didn't have a perfect life. None of us in this building tonight have lived a perfect life. Don't let that hold you back from Christ. So if you are not sure, read what Solomon discovered about life under the sun. In the end, I trust that you too will find that sun, S-O-N, of righteousness has better plans for you than what you will accomplish alone, as Solomon says, laboring under the sun, S-U-N, of this earth. May God bless you all, and have a good night.